Once your restoration has been developed, don't forget you can go to the top. Anytime you see this light bulb is turned on, if I left click, I can toggle and get quick help. So as you can see, I can blow this up if I need it. I can go backwards and look at an overview, and it just tells us everything about the different tools that we can use. A couple of tips. Here's the move tool, how we're going to use the move tool. Here's the form tool, and here's the shape tool. And it just gives a quick explanation of how to use these, plus the other tools such as recalculate, biogeneric variation, and incisal variation. We're going to go into those in just a couple of minutes. So I'm going to close this off again. Again, just to get to it, toggle for help, and then you can shrink it. And if you don't want this on your screen any longer, just close it. Along the right-hand side, we have, these are all tool boxes. So if I look at this, it says View Options. That's the very first toolbox. The second one are actual tools. The third one, Display Objects, which you've seen. The fourth one are Analyzing Tools. And the fifth one is Link Options. So I'm going to go through a few of these before we get into the actual construction tools. So the first tool that I'm going to turn on is this View Options. So I'm going to left click View Options. And as you can see, it says that we can zoom in and out, and we can do the exact same thing with a center click. I can go to lingual, and it'll pop right to lingual. I can go to distal, it'll pop to distal. I can do buccal, mesial, cervical. These are all very good ways to maneuver as you're new. I personally just turn everything with the ball. But if that becomes a little bit time consuming for you, then obviously just go look directly at the distal, look at the mesial, look at the occlusal. It gets there very, very quickly. So with your view options, you can leave it in this position, or if you wanted to move it to the left side, you can customize this any place that you'd like to put this. You may even just shut it off if you're going to just use the ball to rotate. So I'll click minimize on that. The actual construction tools, you can see we have form, move, shape, biogeneric variation, recalculate, contacts, and then the lock to unlock the tools. I'm going to skip this and we'll go into in-depth on that in the next short video. So I'm going to close this. We also have display objects and then analyzing tools. So I'm going to turn display objects on. And I think I've already told you, I personally like to put my display objects in the top left-hand side. What this allows me to do, say I wanted to rotate this up and I wanted to see the upper jaw. I could click on upper jaw and turn the upper jaw on. If I wanted to look through it, anytime we have a slide bar, you can see I can slide back and forth and look at this. I can make it a little bit wider or narrower depending on whatever my needs are. But it's very nice to be able to maybe look through and then evaluate where your contacts are with the adjacent teeth. So that's upper jaw. I can shut the upper jaw off. I'm going to look from the occlusal, and I'm going to turn off the lower jaw. And now you can see I don't have the lower jaw. There's no model, but I can see my contacts and the restoration stays in place. The restoration, if I turn the lower jaw back on, I'm going to shut minimal thickness off. I'll explain that in a minute. And then I can take my restoration and I can make this transparent. So as you can see, if I turn this, you can then look and see how your prep is in relation to your restoration. Minimal thickness is your warning mechanism. If I left click on minimal thickness, see how it puts this blue in here? And what that is it's saying there's our minimal thickness, but if I make the restoration opaque, none of it is showing through. So I know that this is adequately prepared. If that blue shows through, then I would go back. I would look with the restoration being made radiolucent, and I'd look to see where that blue was sticking through, and I'd make a note of it and then say, okay, I have to go right here and reduce a little bit. And I'd go back to I'd go back to acquisition, trim it, and then smooth down the tooth, give myself enough of the reduction, and then rescan, and then actually start the restoration over again. Now the other thing that we have, let's turn this all the way back up, is trimmed model. And what trimmed model does is the exact same thing pretty much as the shutting off the lower jaw. The lower jaw, if I shut that off, just shuts everything. So as you can see, this looks just like the lower jaw. If I hit the lower jaw on and have trim model, we'll be able to see gingival tissues. So this comes into play when you want to evaluate your contours with the tissues. That's another reason why I like to trim. Okay, the next is analyzing tools, and you can see this opened right on top of where display objects was. So what I'll normally do with this is I'll move it slightly off to the side and just make sure that I've got enough room. I'll make it maybe a little bit smaller and then slide it over, and let's make it just a tiny bit bigger so all of the tools show. Now with this, these are analyzing tools. So what that means is I'm going to turn the lower jaw back on. Okay, and I'm going to hit the trim model, so I now have the complete lower jaw. We're going to analyze where the contacts are. If I left click on contacts, it shuts the contacts, interproximal and occlusal, off of the model. If I hit model contacts, it turns them off the model. I'm sorry, the contacts turn them off the restoration. I said model. But the model contacts turn them on and off the models. You've seen color model. So again, we can turn this and it just turns it all white. I never use this tool. Restoration color. What this does is if I slide it, you can see how I can make it either bright white or make it kind of look like more like a tooth. And I have a tendency, I set it to 0 like this, so when my patients look at it, it kind of looks more like a tooth, although they really don't notice it. It doesn't make any difference. It doesn't come out of the machine with stain in it or anything like that. Model box, we've already shown you that. If I turn this over and then I hit model box, I now have a model in it. And evaluation tools are nice. These are the slice, cursor details, and distance. So I'm going to turn on view options, and I'm going to move that back over here. And I'm going to look from the distal. So when I look from the distal, I can kind of finish moving this however I want. But then I'm going to hit the slice button. And when I hit the slice button and blow this up, you can now evaluate what everything looks like with your model. So if I left click and hold, I can then roll and scroll through this. Let me turn it so you can actually see what I'm doing here. I'm clicking on these arrows. I'm going to left click and hold, and then I'm going to roll the ball left and right, and I'm actually just moving through this and evaluating my preparation, excuse me. So I can left click and turn, and what I'm looking for as a new user is over milling, under milling. I can turn the minimal thickness on and off. I can turn the restoration on and off. It doesn't show a lot with that. If I shut the lower jaw off, I just have a shell. So what I normally do, I will have the lower jaw and the minimal thickness turned on because I like to see where that blue may penetrate. All right, once I've done that, that's analyzing tools. So I'm going to close the slice tool, and I'm going to look from the occlusal. I'm going to shrink this down, and I'll click occlusal. Cursor details. If I left click on cursor details and then place my cursor wherever I put the cursor, as you can see on the left side on the bottom, it says the height of this is 4.57 millimeters. This is an arbitrary value measured from somewhere along that model base. Fissure height is showing it's 1.35 millimeters, which is the lowest point on that fissure line. So somewhere on that fissure line, if I roll this around, I might be able to find where it says it's 1.35. The problem with this is that it measures at the shortest distance, which means 90 degrees. So this is not a true accurate reading. That's why I like to use the parameter for minimal thickness set at 1600. What is interesting about this is if you look, it has a width, a length, and then a height on the bottom. What this does is it's showing you the width of the tooth, the length of the tooth, so the length in this direction, the width, and the height. This works extremely nicely with anterior teeth. Okay, so that's the purpose of this width, length, and height at the bottom. The top height is an arbitrary number. The bottom height is the number from your margin. So that is cursor details. I'll shut that off. Distance tool is just that. If I left click and then do another single left click, what this does me is it tells how far that is. So that's 16 millimeters. And you say, well, that's not really too important. But if I go over and shut off the minimal thickness in the restoration, and I wondered how wide my shoulder was. I could set that, and as you can see, it's read 4.9 millimeters. Well, if I look at it in this direction, I'd probably move it over to about here. So it's 0.76, just a little bit, not quite thick enough. But that's a nice tool to use when you're first starting out. So I'm going to shut the distance off. And I'm also going to turn on the grid mode. And the grid mode, it doesn't, as you can see, it doesn't change. So it really doesn't do a lot other than maybe if you want to line up incisal edges or something for anterior teeth. But it doesn't stay as a constant measurement. So if I blow up behind it, that's not a true millimeter, and either is that. Okay, so it's just something that you can help maybe line things up with. Okay, these are the main tools. The only one left is if I left click link options, and this will tell me if I have a group and I want to link a group together. This only comes into play when you have multiple teeth. So whatever you do to one tooth, the exact same thing happens to the other tooth you're working on. So if they're 8 and 9 sitting next to each other and you wanted to lengthen the incisal edge, both incisal edges would be lengthened at the same time. We'll get into that later. Okay, that does the explanation right now for these tools. I'm going to close the link, and the next video we're actually going to do construction tools. So that's what I'm going to call these, are construction tools.